meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I in 1919, had a significant impact on the automotive industry at the time. Most famously, Ettore Bugatti suddenly found his company in French lands and not German. Yet he was not the only one so affected. Indeed, a German automotive giant suddenly found himself, to his horror, French. Yet he did not let this stop him. He was an innovator at another level for the first half of the 20th century, so we're going to take a look at the early career of Emile Mathis. He was born in Strasbourg in the Alsace region of what was, at the time, Germany, in 1880. The family owned a few hotels in the region and had the means to provide young Emile a good education. Of course, this would be in the business field and not engineering, the latter being what he was most interested in. But if he wanted a degree, he needed to get the degree Daddy would pay for, so he received his diploma in business in 1899. Yet it's not uncommon for parents to push their children in directions they don't want to go, but young Emile had the courage to take his degree and leave the hotel business, despite the family protests. He was fascinated by all things cars and wanted to get involved into the auto industry by any means. Indeed, in 1898, he designed and built his own car, christened 1900 Mathis. His family, recognizing the passion, relented and finally supported his passion, and so he opened a car dealership in Strasbourg within months of graduating college. His dealership was quite successful, offering cars from Fiat, Panhard and Levasseur, Dietrich, and other makes. It was through his dealership that he came to dive a bit deeper into the Dietrich company, and his family had some connections with Adrian de Turckheim. Emile began doing some business consulting for them, as well as hanging out at their nearby factory to learn more about how cars were designed and made. He wanted to do more than sell cars. He wanted to design and make his own. But his education was in business, not engineering. So he looked for the best design engineer on the premises and get into such a man's back pocket and absorb anything he could possibly learn from him. And as it turns out, the engineer at the factory that he wanted to learn from was a certain Ettore Bugatti. The two hit it off, and in rather short order, Bugatti was basically teaching Mathis how to design and build a car. Bugatti was rather freelance at the time, and so Emile decided to make an offer to him. Mathis would put up the money to build a car, and Bugatti would design it, with Emile looking over his shoulder. Ettore agreed, and in 1904, a new car manufacturer was established in Alsace, the Hermes. This was ambitious. Emile established a factory in Grafenstaden, which is, of course, in Alsace, to build whatever came from Bugatti's desire, as long as Mathis could quietly observe over his shoulder. And for the next 3 years, they made some serious cars. Big, powerful touring cars with 4-cylinder, 45, 60 horsepower engines, and even some race cars of 25 and 90 horsepower, the engine size being regulated by the specific race they entered. These race-built Hermes cars were driven all over Europe by anyone that wanted to try and be a race driver. Both Mathis and Bugatti raced these cars on the continent and had some success. Being a businessman, Mathis arranged sponsorship for his race cars by Robert Dunlop, And yes, Dunlop himself raced in a Hermes. Yet Emile wanted to build his own car and have his hand in its engineering. This vision would begin to come to reality in 1905. Although Emile had created the company Mathis to build his cars in 1905 as the Mathis Hermes, it would not be until 1913 that actual cars solely wearing the Mathis badge would be offered to the public. Here's how it played down. Bugatti left in 1906 to do his own thing for about a year before going on to design the Deutz, which left Mathis without an engineer to design cars, a task he was fascinated by but not yet qualified to do. So he tapped the shoulder of a notable race car driver and decent engineer, Dragutin Esser. But neither of them were really up to the task of designing a car from scratch. So they purchased a license from another German company, Stover. Don't worry, they'll get an episode. And used this to market a new car, the Esser Hermes. These cars were high-end touring cars, as well as those built for the Grand Prix. Keeping the engines small as per the race rules of the time, these 2 and 2.2-liter engined four-cylinder speedsters were light, powerful, and reasonably successful. And in 1913, Emile designed his own car, the Mathis Babylette. This first car to bear the Mathis badge that would adorn cars for the next 48 years was rather inauspicious. A 1-liter engine of some 8 horsepower, a very light, almost cycle car design, and very cheap to make, and thus cheap to buy. The Mathis Babylettes were selling like hotcakes, until Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Ferdinand less than a year later and turned Europe topsy-turvy. By this time, Emile Mathis had built a sizable factory, which of course was used by the Germans for the war effort. However, by the end of the war, the region found itself French instead of German. Despite this, Mathis pursued his automotive passions regardless of national flag, and his career is the stuff of legend, much of which we'll talk about in later episodes. Emile Mathis was a man that found his land change nations, yet he never changed his true passion to build incredible cars. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History. We'll see you next week. Peace.